On a warm summer night in July 1694, a handsome Swedish count walked through the darkened hallways of a German palace, carrying a small chest of jewels and secret letters. He was about to meet his royal lover, a princess trapped in a loveless marriage for what would be their final rendezvous before their planned escape. By morning, the count had vanished without a trace. His body was never found, and the princess, well, she would spend the next 30 years imprisoned in a castle, forbidden to see her children, denied visitors, and erased from royal history. What happened that fateful night? Was it murder sanctioned by the future King of England? And why was a princess condemned to such a fate for falling in love? Welcome to Crimes of the Crown. I'm Chris, and today we're uncovering one of history's most tragic love stories and unsolved mysteries: the disappearance of Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck and the imprisonment of Sophia Dorothea of Celle. Now, before we dive into the mystery, let's meet our key players in this royal tragedy. Our story centers on Sophia Dorothea of Celle, born in 1666 to George William, Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, and his longtime mistress, Eleanor de Bruce. Though born illegitimate, Sophia Dorothea was legitimized when her parents finally married in 1676, suddenly transforming her into one of the most noble heiresses in German territory. But what should have been a blessing became her curse. Sophia Dorothea was described by contemporaries as vibrant and beautiful, with dark eyes and a pleasant face, and a very lively disposition. She loved dancing, music, and life's pleasures, a stark contrast to the man she would be forced to marry. Enter George Louis of Hanover, her first cousin and future King George I of Great Britain. Contemporaries described him as cold, uncommunicative, and utterly devoid of any charm whatsoever. One diplomat noted he was very silent, seemed to have no taste for conversation, and to prefer drinking to discourse. Unlike the warm and passionate Sophia Dorothea, George Louis was calculating, emotionally distant, and interested primarily in military matters and his mistresses. Enter the third player in our tragic tale, Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck, a dashing Swedish aristocrat and military officer who arrived at the Hanoverian court in 1688. Handsome, cultured, and worldly, he was everything Sophia Dorothea's husband was not. A romantic adventurer with strikingly good looks and impeccable manners, the Count was known throughout Europe for his military prowess and his conquests in the bedchambers of the elite. And finally, we have the puppet master, Duchess Sophia of Hanover, George Louis's ambitious mother and Sophia Dorothea's mother-in-law. Cold, calculating, and fiercely protective of the Hanoverian dynasty's interest, she viewed her daughter-in-law with contempt from the very beginning and would ultimately play a crucial role in her downfall. Now, with these players in place, the stage is set for scandal, intrigue, and ultimately, a disappearance that remains unsolved to this very day. Now, how did Sophia Dorothea find herself in such a loveless match? The answer, as is often the case with royal marriages, comes down to power, land, and dynastic ambition. In 1682, at just 16 years old, Sophia Dorothea was married off to her cousin, George Louis, an arrangement engineered primarily by her aunt, Duchess Sophia of Hanover, who saw the substantial inheritance and territories that would come with this girl. The young princess reportedly wept and begged her father not to force this marriage, even throwing herself at his feet in desperation. According to court gossip, when shown a portrait of her intended husband, she tore it to pieces. But duty prevailed over desire, and the marriage proceeded despite her protests. The union was doomed from the very start. One lady-in-waiting observed, "The prince and princess from the first day lived like cat and dog, and soon after the marriage he frequently beat her, and she returned the blows." Now, despite this mutual animosity, Sophia Dorothea fulfilled her primary duty as a royal wife. She gave birth to two children, George Augustus, the future King George II of Great Britain, in 1683, and Sophia Dorothea in 1687. With her dynastic obligations met, her husband grew even more distant, openly flaunting his affairs. Most notably, he maintained a long-time relationship with Melusine von der Schulenburg, mockingly named the Maypole by the English court for her tall, thin figure. Meanwhile, Sophia Dorothea was increasingly isolated at court, closely watched by her hostile mother-in-law. But what truly made her position unbearable wasn't just her husband's coldness or his mother's hostility, it was their systemic campaign to humiliate her. At public functions, George Louis would ignore his wife completely while lavishing attention on his mistresses. The Duchess Sophia openly criticized her daughter-in-law's manners, accent, and fashion choices. Picture this: a young woman, barely out of girlhood, Trapped in a foreign court where she was actively despised by her own husband and his family, denied meaningful contact with her children, and treated as little more than a dynastic convenience that had outlived its usefulness. Is it any wonder when that handsome, attentive count arrived at court and began showing her the respect and admiration she'd been denied, Sophia Dorothea's heart would stir. Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck first met Princess Sophia Dorothea in the winter of 1688, 6 years into her miserable marriage. The Swedish aristocrat had arrived at the Hanoverian court to serve as a colonel in the Hanoverian Guards. Their initial connection was innocent enough. They had actually known each other as children, as the Count's sister Aurora had been a childhood playmate of Sophia Dorothea herself. This gave them a pretext for conversation at stuffy court functions where the princess was typically ignored by her husband. Now, for months, their relationship remained proper, at least outwardly. The Count would bow deeply when passing the princess in the palace corridors. He would request dances with her at court balls, always maintaining the perfect distance prescribed by etiquette. He would engage her in conversations about books, music, and memories of childhood, treating her with the respect she rarely received from others at court. But eyes were watching. Court gossips noted how the princess's expression brightened when the handsome Count entered a room. They observed how frequently they seemed to encounter each other by chance in the palace gardens. The Duchess Sophia, in fact, always vigilant about potential threats to the family's reputation, began keeping closer tabs on her daughter-in-law. Historical records suggest the relationship turned romantic sometime in 1690. We know this primarily through a collection of over 300 love letters exchanged between the pair, which were preserved and later discovered in the archives of the University of Lund, Sweden. These letters reveal a passion that grew increasingly desperate and reckless with time. In one letter, Sophia Dorothea wrote, "My feelings for you consume me day and night. When we are apart, I count the hours until we may meet again, even if for only a moment, even if only to exchange glances across a crowded room." The Count was equally effusive. "Your love is the air I breathe. Without it, I would surely perish. Let the world condemn us if they must, but know that my heart recognizes no authority but yours." By 1692, their affair was an open secret at court. George Louis, occupied with his own mistresses, initially seemed indifferent to his wife's indiscretion, but his mother, the Duchess Sophia, was not so disinterested. To her, this wasn't merely about infidelity. It was about control and the reputation of the Hanoverian line itself, which was positioning itself for the British succession. The danger increased when Königsmarck began to exhibit jealousy towards George Louis and made little attempt to hide his contempt for the prince. At one court function, he reportedly refused to drink to George Louis's health, a serious breach of etiquette that did not go unnoticed. The lovers were playing with fire, but like many in the throes of forbidden passion, they believed their love made them invincible. They were tragically mistaken. By early 1694, the situation had reached a breaking point. George Louis, initially unbothered by his wife's affair, had come under increasing pressure from his mother to address the scandal. The Duchess Sophia had intercepted some of the lovers' correspondence, providing concrete evidence of their relationship. More critically, rumors began circulating that Sophia Dorothea was considering fleeing the Hanoverian court with her lover, taking her substantial dowry with her. This was more than a matter of hurt feelings or damaged pride. It represented a financial and diplomatic threat that the Hanoverian family could not ignore. In March 1694, George Louis confronted his wife in a rage. According to accounts from court servants, he physically assaulted her, accusing her of dishonoring his name. One lady-in-waiting reported seeing the princess afterward with bruises on her arms and a cut on her face. Now, following this confrontation, Sophia Dorothea was effectively placed under house arrest. Her movements were restricted and her correspondence monitored. She was assigned ladies-in-waiting who functioned more as prison guards than companions. But rather than extinguishing the affair, this opposition only intensified the lovers' determination. They began using trusted servants to carry messages, developed elaborate codes for their letters, and arranged clandestine meetings in rarely used sections of the palace. In a letter from this period, Königsmarck wrote, "They may control your body, my beloved, but they cannot imprison your heart. We will find a way to escape these gilded chains. Have faith." Now, it was around this time that the lovers began planning their escape in earnest. The plan, pieced together from their intercepted correspondence and later testimony, was audacious. See, Königsmarck would arrange for his military leave. Sophia Dorothea would feign illness to avoid court appearances, and on the appointed night she would slip away from her chambers with only the valuables she could carry. The Count would be waiting with horses, and together they would ride to the port of Wolfbüttel, and from there a ship would take them to either France or Denmark, both countries where Königsmarck had connections. Once safely aboard, Sophia Dorothea planned to seek an annulment of her marriage using her husband's infidelity and cruelty as grounds. With her substantial personal fortune, they could establish themselves comfortably in exile. The date was set, July 1st, 1694. Little did they know that their plans had already been discovered. July 1st, 1694. A warm summer evening in Hanover. Court records indicated it rained earlier in the day, but the night was clear with a nearly full moon, the kind of night that might seem perfect for lovers planning an escape. Sophia Dorothea spent the day making final preparations, secretly gathering jewels and important papers. According to her lady's maid, Clara von Platen, who would later provide testimony, the princess seemed unusually calm, almost serene, as if already tasting the freedom that awaited her. Meanwhile, Count Königsmarck attended to his military duties as usual, betraying no hint of his plans at all. At approximately 8 o'clock in the evening, he returned to his quarters where he changed into civilian clothes, dark and unobtrusive, and collected a small chest containing money, important documents, and gifts for Sophia Dorothea. At precisely 10 o'clock, Königsmarck left his lodgings and made his way towards the palace. He was seen by at least 3 witnesses entering through a side gate normally used by servants. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the Count alive. According to the plan outlined in their letters, he was to meet Sophia Dorothea in her chambers at 11 o'clock. From there, they would use the rarely used service corridor to exit the palace and make their way to where horses were waiting. But 11 o'clock came and went. The princess waited, increasingly frantic as midnight approached with no sign of her lover. By 2 in the morning, she was forced to accept that something had gone terribly wrong. The escape attempt was abandoned. The next morning, Königsmarck's valet reported his master missing. His bed had not been slept in. His planned absence from military duties, which had been arranged as part of the escape plan, now became a glaring concern. What happened to Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck between 10 o'clock when he entered the palace and 11 when he was to meet the princess? This question has fascinated historians for over 3 centuries. The official position of the Hanoverian court was complete denial. They claimed the Count had simply left court without notice, perhaps to pursue military adventures elsewhere, but this explanation satisfied no one, least of all those who knew him. A search of his quarters revealed he had left behind most of his possessions, including items of significant value. His personal papers appeared to have been rifled through with certain documents, presumably including letters from the princess, removed. The most damning evidence that something sinister had occurred came from the 4 palace guards who were hastily transferred to remote outposts within days of the Count's disappearance. Before their departure, one reportedly confessed to a fellow soldier that they had been ordered to intercept Königsmarck in the palace that night. According to this account, a struggle ensued and the Count was killed. Whether intentionally or accidentally remains unclear. What happened to his body? Here, the historical record offered tantalizing but inconclusive clues. Rumors circulated that the Count's remains were weighted and thrown into the river Leine that flows through Hanover. Others suggest that he was buried beneath the floorboards in a palace antechamber. Perhaps most gruesomely, some accounts claim his body was encased in the walls during renovations to the palace that conveniently began shortly after his disappearance. What we know with certainty is this. Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck, a high-ranking aristocrat and military officer, vanished completely on the night of July 1st, 1694. No body was ever recovered, no formal investigation was ever conducted, and the woman who loved him would pay a terrible price for their planned escape. Within days of Königsmarck's disappearance, Sophia Dorothea's world collapsed entirely. She was immediately confined to her apartments, denied all visitors except those explicitly approved by her husband or mother-in-law. George Louis, now certain of his wife's infidelity and planned escape, moved quickly to punish her in the most severe terms possible. The formal proceedings began in December 1694, just 5 months after the Count's disappearance. The process was a total sham by any standards of justice. Sophia Dorothea was not permitted to defend herself or even appear before the tribunal that would decide her fate. Her intercepted correspondence with Königsmarck was presented as evidence, but carefully edited to emphasize her guilt while minimizing her husband's cruelty and infidelities. On December 28, 1694, the tribunal declared the marriage dissolved on grounds of Sophia Dorothea's malicious abandonment and gross and scandalous adultery. The irony of George Louis, a man with multiple public mistresses, accusing his wife of adultery was apparently lost on the tribunal completely. With the divorce decree came Sophia Dorothea's sentence: lifelong imprisonment. She would be held at Alden House, a remote hunting lodge converted into a fortress prison in the marshy lowlands of Lower Saxony. She would be permitted no visitors except approved servants and officials. She would never again once see her children, George Augustus at age 11 and Sophia Dorothea at age 7. Her title of Duchess was stripped from her and she would be referred to as only the Princess of Alden. Most cruelly, her name was to be erased from court records. Her children were forbidden to speak of her. No prayers were offered for her in church services. It was as if the Hanoverian court was attempting to erase not just her freedom, but her very existence itself. In February 1695, Sophia arrived at Alden House, the place that would be her home and prison for the remaining 32 years of her life. Her days at Alden followed a strict routine. She was permitted to walk in the castle gardens but could not venture beyond the immediate grounds. She could drive in a carriage, but only along a prescribed route and always under guard. The windows of her apartments overlooked the village cemetery, a constant reminder of her isolation and mortality. Although she was allowed to write letters, all correspondence was opened and read by her guards. The only people permitted to visit were government officials charged with ensuring her confinement remained secure. Yet even in this bleakest of circumstances, Sophia Dorothea maintained her dignity. Accounts from servants describe her as maintaining impeccable personal habits and a regal bearing. She established a small library and devoted herself to reading and music. She even used a portion of her still considerable personal wealth to help the poor of the surrounding villages, earning the quiet affection of local peasants who referred to her as the Princess of Alden long after the court had stripped her of all titles. Most poignantly, she regularly wrote letters to her children, letters that were intercepted and never delivered. She maintained this practice for decades, perhaps clinging to the hope that someday her words might reach them. In 1714, when George Louis ascended to the British throne as King George I following the death of Queen Anne, Sophia Dorothea's situation did not improve. If anything, her confinement became stricter, as her ex-husband feared she might somehow embarrass him in his new role as monarch. Sophia Dorothea died at Alden on November 13, 1726, aged 60. After 3 decades of imprisonment. Her last wish, to be buried alongside her parents in Celle, was granted, the only mercy shown to her in death that had been denied in life. Even then, George I forbade any mourning at court for the mother of his children. When informed of her death, he reportedly said only, "The Witch of Alden is dead," and proceeded with his daily activities as if nothing of significance had occurred at all. The disappearance of Count von Königsmarck and the imprisonment of Sophia Dorothea remain one of history's most compelling unsolved mysteries, raising questions that continue to intrigue historians more than 3 centuries later. What exactly happened to the Count on that July night in 1694? The most likely explanation, supported by scattered evidence and palace rumors from the time, is that he was intercepted and killed on orders from either George Louis or his mother, Duchess Sophia. Some historians suggest that Count Platen, husband of George Louis's mistress, led the ambush, possibly with the assistance of the 4 guards that were hastily transferred following the incident. In 1994, during renovations at Lean Palace in Hanover, workers discovered a skeleton beneath the floorboards of an antechamber. Initial excitement that this might be Königsmarck's remains were tempered when forensic analysis suggested the skeleton dated from an earlier period. The Count's final resting place, it seems, remains unknown. As for Sophia Dorothea, her legacy is paradoxically both erased and enduring. While the Hanoverian court did their best to remove her from official records, her story lived on through gossip, popular ballads, and eventually, historical accounts that recognized the injustice of her treatment. Ironically, despite George I's attempts to sever all connections between Sophia Dorothea and the royal lineage, her bloodline would ultimately have more impact on European royalty than his own. Through her daughter, also named Sophia Dorothea, who married Frederick William I of Prussia, she became the grandmother of Frederick the Great. Her descendants would sit on the thrones of Prussia, Russia, and eventually, through complicated dynastic connections, return to the British royal family. The story of Sophia Dorothea and Philip Christoph raises uncomfortable questions about power, gender, and justice in the early modern period. While both lovers were guilty of violating social norms, the stark disparity in their punishments, he presumably killed without trial, her imprisoned for life, highlights the profound inequality faced by women, even royal ones. George Louis could publicly maintain mistresses without consequence, while his wife's affair resulted in her complete removal from society. He would go on to rule Great Britain, living openly with his mistress Melusine, who was eventually made Duchess of Kendal. Meanwhile, Sophia Dorothea watched the world pass by from behind the windows of Alden House. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the story is what it reveals about dynastic marriages in this era. The human cost of treating people, particularly women, as mere political commodities. Sophia Dorothea's life was sacrificed on the altar of Hanoverian ambition, her happiness considered utterly irrelevant to the greater goals of her husband's family. The lovers' letters, preserved against all odds, gives us a window into their desperate passion. In her final letter to the Count, written the day before their planned escape, Sophia Dorothea wrote, "Tomorrow at this time we shall be free, free to love without fear, free to live without pretense. I count the hours, my beloved, until I may call you mine before the world as you have long been mine in my heart." Those hours of freedom never came. Instead, they became centuries of mystery, speculation, and enduring fascination with a love affair that cost one lover his life and the other her liberty. The story of Sophia Dorothea and her vanished lover remains one of history's most compelling tales of forbidden love, royal intrigue, and cruel punishment. While we may never know exactly what happened to Count von Königsmarck on that fateful July night in 1694, the evidence strongly suggests he fell victim to a calculated elimination orchestrated by those determined to prevent scandal and preserve Hanoverian ambitions. Sophia Dorothea's 32 years of imprisonment, longer than many life sentences in our modern justice system, stands as a stark reminder of how completely a woman's existence could be controlled and erased by powerful men, even as recently as the 18th century. When George I died in 1727, just months after his ex-wife, he was traveling to Hanover. Perhaps a final twist of fate bringing him back to the scene of his greatest cruelty. His son, George II, who had been forbidden from even mentioning his mother while his father lived, reportedly kept a portrait of Sophia Dorothea hidden in his private quarters, a small act of defiance and perhaps a recognition of the injustice she had suffered. What do you think happened on that mysterious night? Was the Count murdered by palace guards, or could he have met some other fate? Was Sophia Dorothea's punishment justified by the standards of her time, or was it an extraordinarily cruel response to a woman seeking an escape from an unhappy marriage? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this exploration of royal scandal and mystery, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Crimes of the Crown for more deep dive into history's most fascinating royal scandals and mysteries. Until then, remember that beneath the gilded crowns and glittering palaces of history often lies stories of very human passion, cruelty, and tragedy.